everybody. We're Cash One Pond. We're ready. We got your back, and we're unbeating all the rest of them. Here we go. You ready? Well, you want money? We got money. You need money? We got money. We're Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. Money to lend, money to spend. We can put money in your hands. We're Cash One Pond. We're Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. You don't have to worry. Sometimes when you're a little broke and you just need something to get over the hill, we're there with the truck. We got your back. We're Cash One Pond. Come down and see us. Cash One Pond. We're Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond. We're Cash One Pond. Cash One. Cash One Pond.
What's up, everybody? Skyline Sports. Happy anniversary to us. Another top 10 countdown coming your way. Last week we did the top 10 women's basketball teams of all time, and it was a almost consensus amongst our three most fervent women's basketball aficionados, as it were. Myself, Colter Nuanez, Brooks Nuanez, co-founder of Skyline Sports, and then Andrew Houghton, who's covered a bunch of women's basketball, a bunch of basketball period for us here over the last 10 years at Skyline Sports. Hardly any arguments. We really didn't jockey much at all. When Andrew put together the list, Brooks and I basically just took the list and then just broke it down. There was really no... we were kind of wavering maybe between like 2, 3, and 4. We kind of had a consensus number 1 and then 3 different tiers, but not much delineation on the list after that. Well, now we're doing our top 10 women's basketball players of the last 10 years. And we were just arguing for like 20 minutes before we turned the camera. Or 4 hours. It's been about 4 hours for sure. So I said, okay, let's stop arguing about this and let's just put it on camera. So here we are, our 10th anniversary coverage, probably presented in part by UpTop, a legendary brand helping us commemorate legendary athletes. It's also proudly presented by Cash One Pond. Cash One Pond is your premier pawn shop in Western Montana. Shop online anytime. CashOnePond.com. That's cash, the number 1, pond.com. Also, always have to say thanks to one of our longtime and most loyal supporters, Town Pump. Town Pump's helped us get to and from many different Big Sky Conference events, including the Big Sky Conference tournaments in both Reno and Boise. Town Pump, Montana's best for more than 6 decades. Okay, so here's the entry point. We have a whole bunch of honorable mentions that we considered for this. But as always, Brooks, Andrew, and I are all kind of on the same page on this. When it comes to postseason all-conference teams and things like that, we like to prioritize winning first and foremost. How did you impact winning? How much did you win? What did you win? How much did that impact sort of the arc of your program, and where does it rank within the history of your program? Then individual accolades, statistics, historical markers and things like that. So that's kind of how we put together this list. So should we start by rattling off the honorable mentions here first, or should we get into the debate about the sort of... Here's the deal. We're all on the exact same page, 1 through 8 about. Andrew thinks there's somebody that should be in the top 5, maybe even, that Brooks and I think maybe is either at or right outside the top 10. And then we have a lot of debate for the 9th and 10th spots. Basically, have 4 or 5 candidates there. So where should we go with this? Should we do the honorable mentions first? Should we?
No, I think we should rip off number 1, and I think we should start up top.
We go 1 down. Okay.
I mean, if you'd like to do the honorable mentions, I think that's fair, but...
Should we build the suspense, go in descending order, 10 through 1, count it down?
Yeah, the 10, 9, and 10 are so hard. We could start with a good argument.
That's what we're here for. We're in a talk radio studio while we're doing this. If you're wondering, if you're watching, what this is the memorabilia here is a piece of Idaho's old court. They opened up a brand new basketball arena this last year. And we made a trip over to the Kibbe Dome. We actually made 4 trips over to the Kibbe Dome. And so Jarek Wolcott, a great supporter of ours, sports information director over there at Idaho, does a great job helping facilitate stuff. As a thank you, he gave us a piece of the old court. So there you go, little Cowles Arena here in the studio. Okay, so...
honorable mentions.
All right, we'll do the honorable mentions.
Framework too, right? Like that gives people a framework of what we're talking about here, what it takes to make the list.
Yeah,
When we
yeah.
start with the
I
honorable
have
mentions,
I have
you
a
gotta be
slight
better than that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you got to be better than these honorable mentions. This is a good team right here.
For sure.
I also want to put a small caveat that, at least in my understanding, or rather, how I broke down this list, the eye test mattered to me.
For sure, the eye
Sitting
test mattered.
courtside,
Yep.
watching someone's not only effort, but how they impacted the game in a variety of ways, just in game. And I said, some of my arguments for these gals on the top 10 were, would I get up off my couch at 7 o'clock at night and go pay money to watch this person?
Right.
Some I would not. And some I can't tell you, I would travel to do it.
Totally. And sometimes you got to go beyond just the pure statistics too, because sometimes, you're scoring a bunch of points on a poor team.
Right,
But most of these young ladies are statistically prolific while also being, as Brooks mentioned, past the eye test, really fun to watch, worth the price of admission, impactful to the overall arc of the last 10 years within the conference, and of course then to us in our coverage at Skyline Sports. So here's our honorable mentions, just in no particular order. I guess first let's start with this. So here's the tournament champions that we've seen from the Big Sky Conference during the Skyline era. Montana won the first championship of the Skyline era. That was the last non-neutral site tournament. Lady Grizz won in Missoula over Northern Colorado. Idaho won the first tournament in Reno with a great run, and you have to think at least a little bit of that is because they had experience in neutral site tournaments, having just come from the WAC. Montana State was the heartbreak of the first neutral site tournament when they lost on a half-court buzzer beater. They get redemption the next year. They go back. They get to the NCAA tournament for the first time in a generation. Northern Colorado, who was one of our best teams of the Skyline Sports era, Cammie Etheridge's crew, they run through the Big Sky and win in Reno, and then they go get an 11 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's the highest seed of the Skyline Sports era. Portland State was the last pre-pandemic team. That was the first year in Boise. Ashley Bolston, Courtney West, Sidney Riley, Callie Jimenez, Desiree Hansen. That team was the 4th seed in the Big Sky tournament, but they ended up rolling all the way through the tournament. They beat Idaho, the Splash Sisters. That was an iconic win. The following year, MSU was supposed to be the for sure, surefire inside track champions. Then the pandemic hits, the tournament championships canceled. It was supposed to be Montana State versus Idaho, which would have been a great championship matchup. That was the Idaho team that still had the Splash Sisters as well as the Clinker Sisters. And then Idaho State, the year after the pandemic, they have a great year, a historic year, in fact, in the history of the Idaho State program. A whole bunch of great players on that roster, many of whom made this honorable mention list. Then you had Montana State again, Darian White, Cola Badbear, and that crew. Sac State, the Kalasia Dean, Isabel Nadabu crew, the first time the Sac State Hornets had ever made it to the NCAA tournament. And then this last year, Eastern Washington goes stem to stern, and they punched their first ticket to the NCAA tournament since 1987. So there's your champions. So here's your honorable mentions for top 10 players in women's basketball history in the Big Sky Conference. Kaylee Valley, Montana. What could have been. She certainly was one of the most prolific scorers, looked like she was well on her way to being an all-time great Lady Grizz. I mean, some would say she still even is. I mean, she's a 2-time all-conference player. She scored over 1,200 points.
She absolutely is.
Yeah, but she's a great player. She got derailed. She tore her knee and then tore her knee again and decided to retire. So it was unfortunate the way it ended, but she was on as good a trajectory as anybody of the modern era, at least in Lady Grizz history. Then you got Callie Bourne, Sailor Grandin, and Grace Kenyon, all from Idaho State.
And a Stefania Ors.
And a Stefania Ors as well. All of them are sort of part of the same group. Grace Kenyon and Sailor Grandin a little earlier. Those teams were more known for turning it on late and being so great in the tournament. And then Callie Bourne and Stefania Ors were both part of that great Idaho State team. So, Andrew, I want you to talk a little bit about those players. I think that part of the reason there's no Idaho – I'll say this, spoiler alert, there's no Idaho State on our top 10. I think part of it's because you had two duos there that sort of took from each other. And then the other part is that Seton Sobolewski, I'd say, is the best coach of the Skyline Sports era. And I think he did such a good job of getting a whole bunch of good players to be a really great team.
Yeah, and those teams weren't built around the idea of having somebody who's going to score 20 points a game, right? So none of those girls really have the statistical resume to be on the top 10 list. But when we're talking about just players who could really do everything on the basketball court, I mean, all of those players could pass, they could score.
For sure.
All of them except Orrs, and she wasn't even a bad defender, but all of them could defend. And yeah, I mean that 2020-21 team with Callie Bourne and Stefania Orrs and Diabo Kanate and Dora Golesh. I mean, all of those girls could be on the honorable mention list. I
Absolutely.
mean, you can't go wrong with having any of those players on your team. I always thought that Callie Bourne was sort of the glue of those teams because she could guard 1 through 4, which was hugely important for them. The weaknesses of those teams were that they didn't have the rebounding or the low post presence, but they could get away with it because Callie Bourne, even though she was 5'10" and she could play the point, so tough. And she led all of those teams in rebounding.
This is amazing. She's the 6th all-time leading rebounder in the history of the Big Sky Conference.
It can't go unsaid, man. And like her senior year, she was so on ball and such a facilitator, and she could have done different things. She could have scored at a much higher clip. She's high on my list of this honorable mention.
Yeah, I mean, she could do anything on the basketball court. I mean, that's the story, right? She was an Aussie rules football player growing up. She wanted to go back to Australia to do that after her basketball career finished. I mean, she was the toughest player in the league.
No doubt.
The best rebounder as the guard in the league. And then Steffi Orrs is somebody who's won everything except Big Sky MVP, right? She was freshman of the year, reserve of the year.
Tournament MVP
that great year where they blew out Idaho in the championship game. Came in sort of as just a shooter, but really high basketball IQ.
Yeah, no
good
doubt.
passer, could run the pick and roll. It's just...
She was one of the best shooters in the Skyline era, especially from like the mid-range, from 18 feet.
And clutch shooting, too.
Yeah, no, we're not talking about the Splash Sisters and shooting the 3-ball, but she could hit that too. But just her ability to be a shot maker it's second to none.
And she holds the Big Sky record, or tied with Regan Skank, actually, for games played still. Because she got that extra year.
Absolutely.
And she had a medical redshirt year as well. So she sort of, I mean, when we're talking about defining eras, right? She was at Idaho State.
Absolutely.
She was on the scene as a freshman. She was a champion, and she's been around forever.
Well, joining those that Idaho State quartet, as well as Kaylee Valley on our honorable mention list, also includes Kelly Cole, who's a hard one to leave off as she was the Big Sky Conference MVP, the best player on the last Lady Grizz team to go to the big dance. Riley Nordgaard, maybe not the first team all conference type accolades, but certainly if you had an all defensive team in the Big Sky, she would have been on it all 3 of her years at Montana State. She was certainly the heart and soul of that team. Such a great, it's hard to say role player, right, Brooks? Because she's more than a role player, but she was so good at playing next to first Jasmine Hamas, then Peyton Ferris.
Yeah, she's the catalyst. I mean, she's the kind of player that if you want to have the best player in the league, that best player can't do it without her.
That's right.
And that takes a level of sacrifice.
For sure.
But I mean, her just like first team all floor burns, I mean, like
right.
Just such a memorable player with the enthusiasm she played with.
And just such a memorable character, too, because she just had so much swagger, so much confidence.
Absolutely.
Lexi Claybo, North Dakota sort of gets forgotten as a Big Sky Conference member, but she was certainly one of the best players there at UND, multiple-time first-team all-conference performer. Mackenzie Johnson for the Lady Grizz, she gets a little bit overshadowed because she was the point guard on some Lady Grizz teams that really struggled. But there was like a moment in time.
She's one of the best players in the league.
And not only that, I seriously think that she's the Iron Woman of the Skyline era. I remember saying this on Nuanez Now, our daily radio show. During her senior year, she went 13 straight games without coming out.
Yeah.
Not for 1 second. During that time, she broke her nose. She was wearing a mask.
She'd pick up full court on defense. I mean, she'd guard 90 feet.
I mean, her physical conditioning was absurd. The year that her and Darian White got to go against each other was certainly
she goes on to be one of the best pros on this list. I mean, she's won a team MVP. I think she's been in the first team all league in the German league she plays in. I mean, she's still playing professional basketball.
The United Kingdom League.
United Kingdom League, right.
But either way, if you want to know more about Mackenzie Johnson, we had a Where Are You Now episode with her last summer. That's available on our Nuanez Now podcast. Okay, in the name of getting into this, then we had 3 transfers also, either transfers into the Big Sky who didn't play their whole career in the Skyline era, or transfers out of the Big Sky who didn't finish their career in the Skyline era. 2 of those 3 were Big Sky Conference MVPs. Fallon Frege, who played at North Dakota, and then Montana State, was the MVP on that 2019 team that didn't get to go to the NCAA tournament. Alicia Davis from Northern Colorado might be the most purely talented player, or one that the league has seen. I mean, her skill was was
insane.
Her skill was like sort of limited. Her ability to just dominate physically,
athleticism, man.
I mean,
Holy
she
cow.
was 20 and 10 all day, every day.
She would have been averaging 4 blocks if she'd stayed in the league. I mean, she left after her sophomore season,
correct.
I think.
Yeah, and she transferred to Colorado Mesa to go to dental school and was never really heard from again. So, what could have been, but I mean, she was the MVP of the league as a sophomore. She's the only underclassman to win the MVP in the Skyline era, so she has to be mentioned. And then the third one's Ashley Bolston, who came into Portland State and really made some waves. Bolston, we flirted with putting her in the top 10 because she's such a game changer. We talked about this last week on top of Portland State's zone. The things that were elusive for Ashley Bolston was her effort was sometimes inconsistent and sometimes non-existent. She was one of those type of players, though, when it was tournament time, she's ready to roll. Like that, and that's why they were so good in the tournament. But I think that's also like why they were the 4 seed the year that they won it, because sometimes she just would be sort of absent. She was never a first-team all-conference selection or anything like that, but she was an all-tournament team selection both her years at Portland State.
Tremendous talent. I mean, you have to mention her because of, I mean, that team was good, as we mentioned on the last podcast, but I also think that she was a catalyst for winning a title and going to the tournament almost by herself in a way.
Well, I think you got to mention a lot of the other players on that Portland State
They were
team.
a good team.
Courtney West in the middle, right? Like was Big Sky Defensive Player
Cindy
of the Year.
Riley was a first-team All-League player.
I mean, Kylie Jimenez was great in the tournament
Freshman of the year that year.
The little point guard. It's the same as some of those Idaho State teams. It's almost like a ton of really good players on that team. Although Bolston, different from the Idaho State girls, Bolston was the clear alpha, definitely, when they were making that tournament
And you can
run.
talk about Alicia Davis, you can talk about Isabel Natabo being mismatches. There's no bigger mismatch in the
6'2"
Skyline
guard.
era than Ashley Bolston.
Yep.
No.
She was you couldn't deal with her.
I mean, she is. If you're talking about like hoops lingo, like she's one of the top 3 biggest ballers
Absolutely.
on this list. It's just that
she's a hooper.
Sometimes she just didn't really care, but then when she did care, she could just be so immensely talented. Okay, so there's your honorable mentions. All right, so here's where we're at coming into the countdown. We are stuck on who to put in the 9th and 10th spots, and here's the 4 players we're stuck on. Delaney Hodgins, who's one of the leading scorers in the history of the league. She was a 2-time first-team All-League pick at Eastern Washington. Certainly one of the great players. She's on their Mount Rushmore, certainly, of women's basketball players, probably along with her sister. Regan Skank, who is, I think, if not the best player in Northern Arizona history, the most impactful of the modern era. Northern Arizona had some good teams in the 90s and early 2000s, and then they were god-awful. I mean, they were as bad as it could be. It seemed like a completely non-rebuild. It seemed like it wasn't even possible to rebuild it. But Skank came in, took control, and she ended up being a 5-year starter for Lori Payne, helped NAU win their first Big Sky titles in the history of the program. Lori Payne's a point guard herself and a point guard coach, and so she needed that sort of direct reflection of herself on the court. That's what Skank provided. So I think we're all on the same page that Skank needs to be in here somewhere. Hodgins has such a great resume, it's hard to move her anywhere outside the top 10. But then we have the 2 that I brought one to the table, Andrew brings one to the table. Mine is Deshara Strange. I have a little bit of a bias because I covered Big Sky Conference women's basketball as a beat writer in the newspaper world from, 2008 when I was at the Montana Kaiman through 2010 when I was at the Missoulian, then 2011 through 2014 when I was at the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. Deshara Strange's senior year was our first year of doing Skyline Sports. So in terms of Brooks, he only saw Deshara Strange a couple times. I guess he saw her earlier on just following it, but just in terms of a reporting capacity, just had her one season. Andrew hadn't joined us yet. I know you were covering the Big Sky a little bit. But to me, Deshara Strange, if she plays more than just 1 year of the Skyline era, just in terms of this exercise, she's at least a top 10, if not a top 5. She's 4-time first-team All-League player.
Only one on
this list. She's a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. She was an absolute freak. I mean, she was the best defensive player I've ever seen in the league, as well as a great coast-to-coast type of scorer. So that's what I brought to the table. And Andrew, and this is the argument we were having beforehand, because it's a very unique situation because it was a 1 of 1.
I mean, I just think it's preposterous that Kalasia Dean isn't clearly on the list. When you're talking about, I know it's only one season. When you're talking
only a
about
Sac State for 1 year.
she transferred in from Oakland. She was a shooting guard at Oakland. Mark Campbell brought her into Sac State, and the year that she was there, Sac State won the regular season title, and they won the tournament title. They went to the NCAA tournament, I believe, for the first time in school history. I know it's only one season. When you're talking about single-season impact and single-season degree of difficulty, what Kalaja Dean was asked to do on the court for Sacramento State, to me, that's the greatest season in the Skyline era. So even if she didn't leave the multi-year legacy like a Regan Skank and a Stefania Orrs that we're talking about, like, how can you not have that on the list?
Yeah, I think it's a fair argument. I mean, can you talk about the usage a little bit?
I mean, so what Mark Campbell did is he brought in Isnell Nadabo, who's a big center, really a really difficult physical matchup for anybody else in the league. And he brought in the first year he had Liana Tillman, who won the Big Sky MVP. And the second year he brought in Kalaja Dean to run the point. What he did is he ran pick and roll over and over and over with those players. So the ball's in the point guard's hands constantly. Nadabo's setting a high screen for them essentially on every possession. And the point guard's either hitting the roller, Nadabo, she's kicking it out to a shooter, or she's getting a shot herself. And this is really, really, really difficult to do. To do that on every single possession. Sac State played one of the slowest paces in the country to keep Nadabo and the point guard, whoever it was, Tillman or Dean, fresh. And even still, I mean, you look at Liana Tillman won the Big Sky MVP her 1 year there. You look at her shooting percentages.
By the way, no offense to anybody, but that's the worst Big Sky MVP of the Skyline era. They were the 7th seed. She got it purely based on statistics. She led the league in scoring and assists. Okay, I get it, but you're the 7th seed and you go one and done in the conference tournament. I don't know, but the high usage thing, I thought, oh man, this is what Campbell's going to do, and it's going to break the awards. But then he got a high usage player that also was incredibly efficient.
I mean, and that's the thing. The Leon Tillman thing the year before showed us how difficult it was to do this efficiently. She scored a ton. She assisted a ton. She shot like 24% from three-point range, and her assist-to-turnover ratio, not very good. Kalaja Dean comes in, and suddenly she's shooting 44% from the field. She's shooting over 30% from three. Really great assist-to-turnover ratio. She's contributing on the defensive end as well. Just like, I don't know if there's another point guard in the Skyline era. We love Darian White. Darian White's going to be very high up on this list. I don't know if Darian White could have done what they asked Kalaja Dean to do with Sac State.
I think that's your best argument.
Yeah,
is if you were to put the other elite point guards, and there's several of them coming up on this list, with this amount of responsibility and usage, who could have handled it?
I think there's one other girl.
I think there's
who could
one
have
other,
done
and we'll talk about her
to
in just a little while.
I think that's fair. So how about you've convinced me?
I'm gonna concede on one of mine. I'm gonna concede on Deshara Strange only because she's only had 1 year in the Skyline era.
I think that's the right move. Right, she's at the top of that honorable mention list.
I also would be inclined to come back on Regan Skank, even though I think she had an immense impact on NAU.
I agree, and I think that's
NAU has been one of the better programs the last 2 years, but it's not as big of a sample size. Like if we were doing, I think we're all kind of on the same page that the premier programs in the league over the last 10 years have been, in no particular order, Montana State, Idaho,
Northern Colorado.
And Northern Colorado.
Yeah.
And then the next tier is basically North Dakota, and then I guess Eastern lately, NAU lately. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I think this is the right choice. I think it goes Hodgins and Dean, or Dean and Hodgins. I think Hodgins stays on there because of just the long-term impact. From the first time she ever stepped on the court in the Skyline era, she was one of the better players in the league, and she really only got better. She was a little bit of not a defensive liability by any means, but there was some manufactured stats to what her game was. But you can't really deny a girl in this era, in this level of basketball, scoring almost 50 points.
No, that's right.
I mean, she has the only person to ever score multiple 40-point games.
Shannon Cates' 42-point performance seemed like one of the most unbreakable records in the league. Katie Bussey tied it because she hit 9 threes in overtime at Idaho State, but it still seemed okay. 42 seems like that's just so far out there, right? And then Hodgins comes in, and I think I told you 48, but I think it actually finished at 46.
Gotcha.
But either way, I mean, still. And if you look at the stat sheet on that game, I mean, she made like 18 field goals or something like that.
That's insane, man.
So she's definitely one of the most prolific individual scorers. And even though Eastern, she's the one player in our top 10 that did not go to the NCAA tournament. Actually, one of two. We'll get to the other one in a minute. But she kept that program steady. Like they were more often good than bad until the very end of the Wendy Schuler era.
And you'd go buy a ticket
That's
on
correct.
a Saturday
That's
to
correct.
watch Delaney Hodgins play.
That's correct. I mean, she was the all-time leading scorer in the history of the league when her career ended, breaking Shannon Schwain's record. So I think she gets on there as well. And then I think Andrew convinced us. I think Kalasia Dean's got to be.
Yeah, I mean the fact that she did what she did and won the way that they won, and it was in pretty convincing fashion, and she had control of it the whole time. Like in the championship game, in the semifinals, she was running the show, and no one could even touch her. I think that's fair.
I mean, for 36 minutes a game, right?
Right.
She's got the ball in her hands.
Most minutes in Sac State history.
The entire time she's on the court. And look, I mean, Sac State was mediocre the year before.
Correct.
They were absolute garbage last year, the year after they left.
Sure.
I know they lost a bunch of other players there, but just like single season impact,
Absolutely.
there's nobody close.
I got to make the note because someone has to say it because it's vitally important, especially on a list that includes Mackenzie Johnston and Darian White. There is no motor that you will ever find in college sports, period, that looks like Reagan Skank.
Oh, she's unbelievable.
The motor is insane.
Unbelievable.
Her ability to maximize her skill set. I'm not going to call her a bad shooter, but she has offensive. She
has offensive shortcomings.
She can come up a little short, and she literally transitioned her game to be an over-the-shoulder pocket passer that could play defense like no one in the league. Her physical transformation into the athlete that she was and became, I mean, it can't go understated how impactful she is.
There's nobody that in the history of our time covering the Big Sky Conference that could throw a behind-the-head pass to the corner like Reagan Skank.
On a dime.
Every time down the floor.
Every time.
And the amount that they fast break, like they literally run a secondary fast break on every possession. The fact that she's second in Big Sky history, I believe, in assists. And she totally should be.
She never whined. She never smiled. She got up, rolled it up, and said, "Let's go."
All right, so
every day.
So here's where we're at. We're going to Shara Strange 12, Regan Skank 11. Delaney Hodgins begins our top 10. Skyline Sports, MT.com. And then we're actually going to do something here. We're gonna slide in number 9. I'm putting Dean at 8. I'm putting Dean.
She just has to be on the list.
I'm putting Dean at 8 ahead of our number 9, even though our number 9 is absolutely one of the most impactful. And if you're talking for my money, if this has we're going to get off the couch on a cold January Thursday evening and drive down to Brick Breeden Fieldhouse or drive down to Dahlberg Arena or drive down to wherever you're going to watch a Big Sky Conference women's basketball, this is my number 1. I agree. I was unbelievably infatuated with the way she plays. She's like straight out of an And One mixtape. She set the country on fire. I mean, Caitlin Clark's getting all this credit. Caitlin Clark deserves some credit. We certainly could have an entire episode all about that. She's the tipping point. She's not the pioneer. She's not the maverick. Far from it.
Absolutely.
I don't think Taylor Pierce is either, but Taylor Pierce was the one that set it on fire. To put this in perspective, there had never been a young lady in the history of the Big Sky Conference to hit more than 120 threes in a season. The Big Sky's all-time three-point record before Taylor Pierce stepped onto Idaho's campus was somewhere in the 270 range. Katie Bussey, I think, hit 272 threes in her career.
272.
Think of Katie Edwards, for example. Katie Edwards was a phenomenal player at the University of Montana. Greatest shooter in Lady Grizz history, most would argue. 260 threes in her career. Taylor Pierce hit more than 150 3 years in a row. Taylor Pierce hit 472 threes, which at the time was more than anybody in the history of college basketball, a man or a woman. At one point, she was taking 13 threes a game and making 5 threes a game. The proficiency to get her shot off John Newell used to talk about this all the time, shoot or shoot. There's nobody in the history of the league that embraced that mentality more than Taylor Pierce. She is my favorite player to watch in the Skyline Sports era. It used to be like the Steph Curry phenomenon, right? Like when Steph Curry would be cooking during his prime, you'd text your buddies like, turn it on right now. He's going to hit 5 in a row. That's Taylor Pierce, man. She was absurd to watch. She's the Splash Sisters were iconic in the Skyline Sports era, but she's the one that made the Splash Sisters and ended up splashing it more than anybody in the history of the league. So number 9, Taylor Pierce, University of Idaho.
Yeah, I mean, it also, like, the Splash Sisters nickname is so on point, right? Because they were at the same time that Steph and Clay were doing what they were doing in Golden State.
Same time, yeah.
I mean, and that was something that nobody had ever seen in basketball. They broke the math in a new way. And the fact that this was happening in Moscow, Idaho at the same time that it was happening down in San Francisco or whatever, like, kind of unbelievable that sort of bubbled up at the same time. And it's just like, it's preposterous, right? She was attempting 13 threes a game. You look at that, and for 50, 60, 70 years of basketball history, I guess the three-point line hadn't existed for that long. For 30, 40 years of basketball history, people would look at that number and say, well, that is not winning basketball. You can't do that. You just can't do that.
For sure.
It would blow people's minds. And then Steph comes along, and at the same time, Taylor Pierce was doing it in Moscow, Idaho. It's a sweet story.
It changed basketball, not only women's basketball. It changed all basketball. They were a fundamental part of that transition, and they became nationally famous. And if you ever got to see it live, the absolute joy and effortlessness that came with the ability to flush that last shot and just go get up another one, the ability to be a hooper, the ability of what the eye test looks like, man or woman. I think if you're a little kid watching Taylor Pierce, you say, I want to play like her.
Well, we always talk about trends in the Big Sky Conference too, right? Like we talk about this in football all the time. The Grizz were throwing the ball all over the place, so then everybody else started to try to replicate that. That's how you get Eastern Washington. Then the Grizz go to the ground and pound. We go up and down, we go up and down. Everybody in the Big Sky Conference for 30 years was trying to figure out how to break Robin Selvig's zone. When John Newley gets into the league, what's he say? Well, we're going to break your zone by shooting you out of the gym.
Yeah.
And then he found his two that could actually do it. It didn't coincide because Coach Selvig stepped away. The Lady Grizz stopped running the zone. But forever, people were trying to, let's play defense like Robin Selvig's teams. That's what everybody was trying to do. That's what Seton Sobolewski was trying to do. That's what Trisha Binford was trying to do. It's not... It's so hard to replicate a zone that's been in place for 38 years. Like when you have the communication throughout a program. But this is, I mean, it's true. This was the tipping point that swung the pendulum back the other way. It introduced high volume spread offense basketball to Big Sky Conference women's basketball. Then we get to number 8, Kalasia Dean. That's where I'm slotting her for our written piece, which you can also find SkylineSportsMT.com sooner than later. Team UpTop has been providing some of the coolest Montana-made gear and lifestyle clothing for more than a decade, and now the legendary brand is excited to partner with Skyline Sports to celebrate our 10th anniversary with a variety of top 10 lists, counting down some of the best athletes of the last decade throughout the Big Sky Conference. UpTop Clothing was started by a pair of Montana brothers who have a great passion for the Treasure State and all the people who make it so great. Whether you're in the market for Grizz, Bobcat, or Frontier Conference gear, whether you want a t-shirt or a cap hat or any other high-quality lifestyle clothing, be sure to visit teamuptop.com. If you shop online, use the checkout code Skyline15 to get 15% off all online orders. Teamuptop.com. UpTop Clothing, reminding you to take a step back and enjoy the moment. Then we get to number 7. This is one I argued for hard. She also only played one season during the during the Skyline Sports era, but I thought that she was I thought she had one of the 3 or 4 best senior years of anybody on this list. I also thought that she, if it wasn't for a Juliette Jones 3/4 court heave, I think the whole thing would have ended up differently. And then I think when you put it into totality, I think she's probably on the Mount Rushmore of all-time great women's basketball players at Montana State. I believe she's 3rd in school history in scoring. She was a multiple-time first-team all-conference selection. She ended her career as a Big Sky Conference MVP and perhaps the most gracious of the players on this list, just in terms of the fluidity and the gracefulness that she moved with on the basketball court, combined with her graciousness as a person. Number 7 is Jasmine Hamas, Montana State. It's a tough one, right? Because I like her here. First of all, you're talking about eye test. I mean, I just think that she's one of the most naturally talented, smoothest players on this list. So smooth. She has so many great individual accolades, and I also just think that so much of what happened afterwards was set. The tone was set by her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That class that they brought in that included Lindsay Stockton and Alexa Dawkins and Marguerite Barham and all these gals that had known each other forever. They played on the same little club team that John Stockton coached. Well, they bring it in, and there was a lot of fiery personalities. They needed, we used to call her the Ice Queen. They needed the Ice Queen to be able to steady the ship. And again, if not for a Juliette Jones 3/4 court heave in the first round of the Big Sky tournament, this whole thing could have been different. I also think that you get a little bit of leeway being that Bobcat team, because that was the first team that won the league that didn't get to host. And that was like a really disappointing thing. It's circumstantial. There's nothing that got robbed from anybody. They decided to go to a neutral site.
Sure.
But to not get to host and then have it end like it did, it was like just a double gut punch. Yet still, Jasmine Hamas ended her career with one of the most indelible memories, at least for me as a reporter of the Skyline Sports era, when she showed up to the postgame press conference all by herself and talked to us. And I couldn't believe how composed she was given what had just happened. But number 7, Jasmine Hamas, a former Big Sky MVP from Montana State.
No one smoother, no one with more pace, no one that played really a more winning style of basketball. And you look at the teams that come in the next decade after her leaving, she really did set the foundation for Montana State to be the most dominant women's basketball program of the Skyline era. She really did set that foundation with just the way that they play. And she also launched what was already a budding and very successful career in Trisha Binford into the stratosphere. I think that someone like Jasmine Hamas set that stage for Trish to not only settle into what that program had to become, but to believe in it and to take it to that next level. So I think all of those things, when you talk about the era of Skyline, she was so impactful for those exact reasons.
Well, it's also really hard to have to follow in the footsteps of what she had to follow in. Her aunts, particularly her Aunt Blythe, was one of the great Bobcat players ever. And to follow in those footsteps and then be able to sort of carve your own legacy, certainly worth remembering. Number 6, Beyonce B, University of Idaho. She's another one. She's the only other player besides Delaney Hodgins on this list that didn't play in the NCAA tournament. Also, if you judge by her team success, Idaho actually incrementally had worse records each of Beyonce B's 4 years. That said, the individual accomplishments, a 3-time first-team All-League player, the freshman of the year, her freshman year. Excuse me. She wasn't the freshman of the year. Darian White was the freshman of the year. We'll get to that in a minute. But Beyonce B was a first-team All-League selection instead of Darian White. I remember that was a controversy then. Either way, B, I guess now 4-time first-team All-League selection and finished her career as one of the all-time leading scorers in the history of the conference. And Andrew, we had to put her on the list because regardless of team accomplishments, like Beyonce B, if you're just to watch the league while she was playing, she was the best player the whole time. And
that's why she got those accolades and like the overwhelming weight of those accolades, and also like a huge what if here, right? She had the extra COVID year. She transferred across the Palouse to Washington State. She didn't play a ton.
Right.
If she stays at Idaho for that 5th year, she holds all of the records.
She obliterates the records.
Because like Beyonce B we're talking about all the girls on this list. I mean, probably the easiest bucket.
The easiest bucket.
That free throw line jumper.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
Pump fake and get under you and get to the rim. Like just so polished. And she was as a freshman too. And, John Newley always tells the story about like he regrets not recruiting Carmen Gfeller because he already had Beyonce B in that class. And
Sure.
just like didn't think he needed her, but like he was right. She was just the best player, incredible scorer. And it was always puzzling why those Idaho teams didn't have more success, even as they were sort of in that transition period right after the Splash Sisters graduated. But she was a great player.
Great player, and I always say, the as a photographer, the best players to photograph end up being the best players. Like I take the nicest photos, the cleanest photos, the most diverse photos of the best players, and she is in my top 5 all sports of easiest people to photograph because how much separation she creates, how much of a bucket she is, how fundamentally sound she is, where the ball is coming off her fingers, where she gets to on the court. There really is no one like her on this list. As far as, Delaney Hodgins is a good scorer. We talk about Jasmine Hamas being smooth. There's really no one like Beyonce B as far as her ability to put the ball in the hoop.
SkylineSportsMT.com celebrating our 10th anniversary. Top 10 women's basketball players of the Skyline Sports era. Thanks to our great friends at UpTop Clothing. Right now, if you visit TeamUpTop.com, use the promo code Skyline15. You're going to get 15% off of all your orders. They have all sorts of sweet gear, whether it's college-oriented gear, Cats, Grizz, Frontier Conference. You want some Montana made in Montana gear. Montana over everything. One of my favorite brand lines that they have there at UpTop Clothing. They have awesome hats, sweatshirts, everything in between. Our countdowns, legendary athletes presented by a legendary brand. UpTop Clothing reminding you to take a step back and enjoy the moment. Use Skyline15 at TeamUpTop.com for all of your online ordering. All right, number 5, some could scream recency bias, but here's the resume. 2-time Big Sky Conference Defensive Player of the Year, the outright MVP, and she won the league regular season title by banking in a buzzer beater in Bozeman. Then she goes on to win the conference tournament MVP, and her team wins a school record 29 games. They break their school record by 8 full wins, go on to the NCAA tournament. I thought they got jobbed. They should have got a better seed than they did. All that's to say, though, you go 29-5 and you sweep the awards. Defensive Player of the Year, MVP, Conference Tournament MVP, you're the ultimate alpha of the league, and you win the league on a walk-off shot, basically against the number 1 team of the last 10 years at Montana State. Our number 5 player is Jamie Loetta, the outstanding point guard for Eastern Washington. She's the only 2-year player on the list, guys, and but I think that she probably had at least among the great grand finales of any player in the conference of this last 10 years in Skyline Sports history.
And one of the bigger turnarounds, I mean, Eastern was on not only a downward turn, they were on an absolute spiral.
They were terrible.
They were terrible. And, bringing Jody Gleason, who I thought did such a tremendous job last year with that team. But she was the alpha. You're right, Colter. I mean, when she was on the court, it was kind of her show. Inspired her teammates, the way that the charisma she played with, as well as just the defense that she could muster. And then such a dynamic offensive player. I mean, she could just score the ball. She could pass the ball. A really well all-around player. And again, when you talk about going and getting 30 wins and sweeping the awards like that, I mean, that is a historic season for her. I think that she fits right on this top 10 list.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was, like you said, the charisma, the force of her personality. The first year she came in from Arizona State, so I guess 2 years ago, right, it was clear that she had it. It took her a while to find her footing in the league. I mean, she shot really, really poorly that first year, and so regardless if she's the best defensive player of the year, I'm like, well, if you have a point guard who shoots this poorly, you're going to struggle. She was so much better this most recent year. She was great on offense, and then just watching the joy with which she played the game. Totally. When you talk about changing the culture of a team in 2 years, getting everybody to pull in the same direction, leading with your first force of personality, that's one of the better performances that I've seen, and the resume sort of speaks for itself. And she's right up there in the legacy of players like Tashara Strange, right? These great defensive guards who would just hawk you. I mean, Regan Skank picking up full court. Diaba Kanate at Idaho State. Just absolutely always dangerous on the defensive end. You always had to know where she was, and she would throw your offense completely out of whack if your point guard couldn't handle it.
Well, I also think you could say she's definitively the greatest player in Eastern Washington basketball history, right? Women's basketball history.
I mean, the Hodgins
sisters are right there, but winning is the thing that matters the most, and they won more games than anybody in Eastern Washington history.
That's a lot of games.
I mean, eight more wins than the school record. That's a month worth of games more than the last best team. And they hadn't made the NCAA tournament in my life.
And during the last 3 weeks of that season, they had some close games. And guess what? Every single game, she would create 4 to 6 points that were just that she created. She manufactured them on the defensive end on a fast break, just 2 layups, and you're winning a game by 5. You're that's why you're winning.
I mean, you win in Missoula by 1. You win in Bozeman on a buzzer beater, and it's her. It's all her.
It's all her, for sure.
Skyline Sports MT.com. All right, into the top 4. Number 4, Darian White. The resume is unbelievable. She was the freshman of the year in the Big Sky Conference. She was a 3-time unanimous first-team All-League selection. She's the only player in league history with more than 1,500 points, more than 500 rebounds, more than 500 assists, and more than 250 steals. She's actually one of only, I think, 8 players in the history of college basketball with those statistics. She was as good of an on-ball defender as the league has ever seen, men or women. And the thing that's crazy is, and I remember thinking this and even saying it, that 2019 Montana State team is one of the 3 best teams of the Skyline Sports era. They're one of the best teams in the history of the league. They went 19-1 in conference. They had 6 seniors. They had the Big Sky MVP in Fallon Freegee. The catalyst of that team was Darian White. The best player on that team was Darian White. She then made it her mission, because that group of girls did not get to go to the NCAA tournament, to get the Bobcats back to the NCAA tournament. The next year they lost to the championship game. The following year they won the championship game. Darian White's speech in homage to those seniors that didn't get to go, I thought was one of the classiest moments in Skyline Sports history. The only thing that's missing from her resume is a Big Sky Conference MVP. I don't know how she never won a Big Sky Conference MVP.
Because we're taking her for granted after the freshman year.
Yeah, totally.
It's right. And, there's so much to this. She had as much freedom as anybody in the history of the conference. She did whatever she wanted, both because she could and because Tricia Bidford told her to. But Tricia Bidford's had a ton of great point guards, whether it's Erica Perry or Lindsey Stockton or Hannah Cottle. I even think the one right now, Natalie Picton, has a lot of potential. Darian White's the greatest point guard Trisha Binford's ever coached. She would tell you that herself. And it's really hard to be a player like Trisha Binford was. That was an all-time great in the Australian League, played in the WNBA, still is all over the Big Sky Conference record book. And to have someone basically be you, like Trish played at Boise State, Darian's from Boise. She made her an extension of herself on the court. They put so much on Darian White. Again, the naysayers could point towards the shooting splits. Well, Darian White was getting trapped and bullied and knocked off the spot and boxed and won for 4 straight years, and she still put up those kind of numbers. But more than anything, guys, you can put all the statistics aside, all the postseason accolades aside. Darian White was the point guard from start to finish on the team that won the most games in the history of the Skyline Sports era. I believe their final win total when it was all said and done was 89 victories as a group. And that, to me, is why she's in the top 4.
100%. And I think of this list, we talked about someone like Beyonce B or Jasmine Hamas, or someone that when you go to watch them, you're like, man, this is a dominant player. If you know basketball,
That's right.
You know what this person's doing. Darian transcends that to the point of you don't know basketball, you know nothing about the game, and you show up, you say, that's the best player by a lot. It's not even particularly close. Again, we talk about her motor. I could speak to Darian forever. Another person, she can't make it easier to photograph a person. Just so dynamic athletically. And her ability to, what is she? Is Darian 5'4"?
5'4", yeah.
5'4", slight body, obviously athletic as heck, could get downhill with the best of them, the floater game. And we're talking about some skills that no one else on this list even comes close to even having. Most people in basketball and life don't. So Darian White, I think, is no question a top 5 player. I think she fits nicely in there. And honestly, one of the most memorable that we've covered.
Well, the journey is the part that's so impressive about her, right? I mean, we talk about Beyonce, who came in with her that same year and was so polished as a freshman and just never evolved past that. She was always that incredibly polished, great scoring player, but she didn't evolve, and her teams didn't win anything, as we talked about. For Darian White to be able to go from this incredibly athletic freshman on a great team where she's just blowing up the other team's game plan with defense picking up full court, but also sort of just orbiting around players like Fallon Frigie, to then evolve and be able to take control of the team 2-3 years later and win another Big Sky title as like the unquestioned leader of the team, as a point guard who's been there, seen everything, done everything that there is to do in the league. That's really difficult to keep your trajectory on that upward slope when you come in as good as she did, and that was so impressive to me, because that's the most memorable thing about her to me, is the way we saw her change, right? She always had the athleticism, she always had the first step, but she learned a lot playing under Trisha Binford. She got a lot better, and she changed over the course of those 4 years.
There's also the element where when you become a star in Montana, especially in women's basketball, that's why we were never surprised by this Caitlin Clark phenomenon. Like, women's basketball is covered heavily, like as heavily as anything besides probably football. There's just as many media people at basketball games for women as there is for men, a lot of times more.
Absolutely.
Especially because the girls are winning a lot more often, and this team was winning so much. Darian White was so shy when she first came in, and they put so much of that on her. And then it was very clear that she had to be a star. I remember when I first started interviewing her, she would have to be on speakerphone in Coach Binford's office and sit there with Coach Binford. And then by year 2, okay, I can be on the phone by myself, but I still want to be in Coach's office. Then by year 3, sure, call me anytime, and then it's like, she just blossomed so much. She became so good at that. But that's not easy. And to have that spotlight, a lot of times we see people's careers ebb and flow. Hers never ebbed and flowed. It came to a crash at the end because of some weird circumstances, but for her individually, it never ebbed and flowed. She was the court general on the court every single second she was on the court.
Well, she had that great relationship too. This is just sort of a little bit of a tangent, but she had that great relationship always with the Big Sky tournament, because it was in Boise every year when she was there.
Her mom
hometown,
would be there.
Her whole family.
Yep.
There's always the Idaho press guys coming out to write a feature story about her every year, and she loved it. She was so great in that spotlight.
You can't forget that you talked about the shooting splits, Colter. That's the only game plan for Darian White. You ain't stopping her.
Right.
There's no. You hope she misses.
Well, and
you ain't stopping her.
Well, you also hope she shoots, because she's such a good passer.
Yeah.
I mean, Cole Badbear from the elbow is a 65% shot. Tori Martell, trailer
there's
three.
no stopping.
I mean, Tori Martell won the college women's basketball 3-point shooting contest. She's one of the greatest shooters in the country. So, certainly, the floater is actually the best you can do playing Darian White
100%.
Defensively. All right, number 3, Michaela Ferenz. She was a 3-time Big Sky Conference first-team All-League selection. The freshman of the year, she was the tournament MVP as a freshman to help lead Idaho to the NCAA tournament. That was really her breakout. And then she had the arduous task of trying to become the Big Sky Conference's all-time leading scorer and then achieving the feat of becoming the Big Sky's all-time leading scorer. She made over 400 threes in her career. If Taylor Pierce wasn't her teammate, she'd be the all-time leader in the Big Sky by more than 100 three-pointers made. She was as prolific of an offensive player as we have covered. And again, somebody that it's when you hit a peak like that when you're a freshman, it's so easy to have ebbs and flows. She really didn't have ebbs and flows, even though the scouting reports kept getting more diverse. She kept getting more attention, yet she still just continued to fill it up. And by the end, I mean, she's the best scorer that we've covered, period, in the history of the league.
Yeah, another one of those players where just like the statistical achievements, what's written down in the black and white is just overwhelming. And it speaks for itself also, right? Like you can quibble with the degree of success that her teams had. I mean, if you're that great on the stat sheet, but that's the thing. The possibilities with her were endless, right? She could have won, I think in our minds, 3-4 Big Sky titles. I mean,
yes.
What we were thinking is like, why don't they win it every year? Because they have Michaela Ferenz, and she's the best player, right?
100%. And she's just more diverse than a lot of these other scorers as far as her ability to what she has in the bag. She can score from all 3 levels. Tremendous free throw shooter. She's long enough to be able to defend. She's willing enough. Another player that plays with a high level of joy. She's fun to watch. She gets up and down. She shoots it really fluidly. Very memorable player. And just another level than some of these other really good scorers like Delaney Hodgins or someone. Just kind of that next level of, I think she could probably do this anywhere and everywhere.
The next level of self-confidence too, right? All of those, you have to have that to score at that level in any league. But hers was just completely off the charts. Like the amount of self-belief that she had.
Yeah.
Well, you can tell she's a coach's kid, right? And shout out to Chris Ferenz. I know he listens from time to time, and he came up and gave me the nicest thank you when I wrote a feature about Michaela during her senior year. Walla Walla, Washington, a town so nice they named it twice. So, number 3, Michaela Ferenz, one of the 2 Splash sisters to make this top 10 list here, SkylineSportsMT.com. Our top 10 countdown probably presented by Cash One Pawn, the premier pawn shop in Western Montana. Whether you're in the market for a firearm, a computer, some sound system, jewelry, power tools, whatever, they got it for you at Cash One Pawn. You can also shop online, CashOnePawn.com. That's cash, the number 1, pawn.com. All right, into the top 2. Number 2, and there's arguments on either side for either of these 2 young ladies, but number 2, Savannah Smith. She was a 3-time first-team All-Big Sky selection, one of the leading scorers in the history of the conference at Northern Colorado. She was the best player on the best team of the Skyline Sports era. And Brooks mentioned this last week, but there's a whole bunch of players on this list that are really, really good Big Sky Conference players. Savannah Smith is a very good college basketball player. Savannah Smith is playing probably wherever she wants. Is she going to score 25 a game in the Pac-12? No. But could she play at USC? No question. And it's actually fortunate for us that it's probably before the transfer portal era, because she probably would have been up and out and gone because she's just so good. But she was the catalyst for everything that Cami Etheridge's teams wanted to do. If you're the best player on the best team, you have to be in the top 2 players on this list. I know you profiled her senior year, Andrew.
Yeah, I just, when you think about why that Northern Colorado team got so much respect from everybody, I mean, they were nationally relevant, right? They got the highest seed that a Big Sky team has gotten in the NCAA tournament in the Skyline era. That all comes back to her because of exactly what you said. Everybody could see that this was a player who could be on the national stage. This was a player who could play anywhere. And we're talking about, we'll bring it full circle here. I mean, who's the only player who could do what Kalasia Dean did at Sac State? I mean, Savannah Smith would have done even better, right? She was the absolute quintessential point guard, so smooth, so in control running the pick and roll. I mean, she could shoot it out to 30 feet like the Splash sisters could.
Yep.
but the way that she worked, the way that she knew that where everybody was on the floor to get an open shot, just fully in control no matter what the chaos was going on around her.
And the fact that her high school career got derailed by a knee injury, that's how she ended up in Northern Colorado. Then her college career got derailed by a knee injury. She came back from it. So the fact that she had those spouts of adversity and still was so prolific. The other thing is, the reason that she is the best guard in the Skyline Sport era is because she's one of the 3 or 4 best on-ball players we've covered.
Definitely. She's
also probably the best off-ball player besides Taylor Pierce that we've covered as well. That's a ridiculous skill set to have as only a college player, to be able to play on and off the ball, be high usage with the ball in your hands, and be high usage when they're running you off screens. And she's not very big. She could guard, too.
She can guard. She a tremendous facilitator. So pure. I mean, one of the purest athletes that we've covered. I mean, her ability, we talked about that with Jasmine Hamas. I mean, just floats and glides and such a true jump shot. I mean, the way that the net splashes when she hits it is a different thing. You talk about the Splash Sisters. They both shoot a beautiful basketball, but Savannah Smith, it's just a different kind of thing. I agree with you, Colter, that I think she can play anywhere in the country. I don't even think that she'd be on the bench. I think she can get tick darn near anywhere.
I always go back to and think, and this is probably not the memory or what she wants us to be talking about, but I always just think about to the way they went out to that Eastern Washington team when Jess McDowell White throws the ball off her back
so
on
weird.
the inbounds. Just
so wild.
But that's the only way she was going out. Like, nobody saw that coming,
For those that loved greatness and the chasing of greatness, that was the single most depressing day in the history of the Big Sky Tournament. Congratulations to 6-seeded Eastern Washington and all their freshmen for pull that upset, and congratulations to Portland State for just completely derailing the Splash Sisters. But we were like all so hyped for it was going to be
that
either
championship
it was
game.
going to be either Northern Colorado, Idaho, or Montana State, Idaho.
Yep.
We got none of it.
None of it.
We got none of it.
Welcome to one and done tournament.
Exactly, on neutral sites.
But just like that's the only way that she could have gone out to me is something that completely shocking. That
Right.
Nobody saw it coming.
Off her back.
One of the I always think about like she turns around immediately as soon as she feels the ball hits the back, swipes down, and comes within a nanosecond of
stealing
stripping
it.
the ball.
Yeah.
Like she's the only player with just the instincts, the athleticism, to make that play in that situation, to come that close to making that play in that situation. I just always think about that. But she was one of one.
SkylineSportsMT.com. All right, here we are, number 1 in our top 10 women's basketball players. Here's the thing. I think number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think they all have better quote-unquote resumes or whatever you want to say. But in terms of being the catalyst, in terms of being the alpha, in terms of being the person that you would get off the couch to go see, and in terms of being the best story that we've covered, number 1 on our list is Peyton Ferris, Twin Bridges' finest. She's the greatest Class C basketball player in the history of the state of Montana. She had a career that was so all over the place because they switched her positions multiple times. She had a horrible knee that gave her troubles, and so they brought her off the bench. But they basically created the top reserve award in the Big Sky Conference for Peyton Ferris. She was the best reserve player, even though she wasn't a reserve. She was averaging like 15 points per game off the bench.
She'd come in within like the first 3 minutes.
They just had to bring her off the bench because of the rotation. But she learned how to play the 4, even though she's only about 5'8", and it revolutionized everything Montana State did. She then goes on to not only become the Big Sky Conference MVP, first-team All-League player, but she also had the single best performance by a Big Sky player in the NCAA tournament her senior year. She willed the Bobcats to a victory in the Big Sky tournament after they had the heartbreaking loss the year before in Reno. They capped it by winning the Big Sky championship, and then they go to the NCAA tournament. They have the unfortunate task of having to go play on Washington's home court against Kelsey Plum and the Huskies, and they were able to hang tough, and Peyton Ferris had 33 points in the final game of her college basketball career. Like I said, the resume is good. She got a Big Sky MVP. She's a 1,500-point scorer. She, all these different individual accolades. But to me, it's just watching the games. She was the biggest bucket that we've covered, and she did it in such an unorthodox fashion. She was grimy. She was tougher than nails. And it's the best story in women's basketball that we've covered during the Skyline Sports era.
There's no one like Peyton Ferris. The level of heart that she played with is unmatched. And we talked about some of these players. Colter, you mentioned the word catalyst. We talked about some of these players that go on and take these teams, take the league by storm, and they go in and win something. the way that Peyton Ferris did it in the fashion that she did it in with what her skill set is, she's playing so far above her head more than anyone that we've talked about. We're talking about people that can maybe play in high Power 5 leagues like Savannah Smith. Peyton Ferris ain't that. But there is no one that was stopping Peyton Ferris. She came in and slapped the league like no one has, and to go and win it the way she did, back-to-back top reserves, and then come in and win the MVP, tournament MVP, and then go score 33 in the tournament.
That's right.
There's nothing like that, folks. We're talking when you go and you play Kelsey Plum in Washington, you go have that performance after that career that you just put on display. I mean, that is as high of a level as you can get to.
Well, and it's also the first time they've been to the NCAA tournament in 25 years. Everybody coming into the season was like, well, how's this team even going to compete at all? You lose Jasmine Thomas, Lindsey Stockton, Alexa Dawkins, all these great players. Peyton Ferris takes it on her back, and they ride her all the way. That was the table setter, right? Like Thomas and that group winning the regular season, the first sort of step up. But getting back to the NCAA tournament then set the tone for Montana State to be the program of the last 10 years of the Skyline Sports era.
Best Class C player of all time, man. If everyone who's listening to this likely knows, or if you don't, what Class C sports and what Class C basketball is in the state of Montana, what that imprint is, and then not only what that imprint, but what that transition is into Division I, and then what that transition is to go from a reserve player to the player that she became.
Especially when you have no knee.
I mean, we're talking about a whole different level of growth and transition here.
Her last game in high school, too. 43 points, so you know she's a baller. When she goes out with a 43 in high school, 33 in college. I know you didn't catch much of Peyton Ferris, but any thoughts to put a wrap on this thing?
I didn't watch much of any of her career. I just, when we were doing research for this, I mean, that is the game that stands out the most to me.
For sure.
Right? When you go to Kelsey Plum's home court and you outscored the all-time leading women's basketball scorer in history before Caitlin Clark came along, like, just the sheer will that it takes to do that, right? And especially knowing the kind of player she was, where she's an undersized post player going up against Power 5. Like, that to me is probably the best single game performance. I know they lost. Probably the best single game, but it was a close game for a lot of the game.
They hung a little bit. I mean, you're going against Kelsey Plum, who's one of the best basketball players in the world, and it's on their home court. I mean, you talk about bad draws. Last two NCAA tournaments the Cats have been to, they had to go to Stanford, the number 1 overall seed. And they had to go to Washington. It's like, it doesn't even matter how good you are. Like, it's just not happening. It's tough draws.
Believe it or not, Kelsey Plum didn't play Class C basketball. I think Peyton Ferris tell me if I'm wrong, Peyton. I know you're probably out there. I mean, she's probably riding her horse to school here, guys. And we're going to score 35 in the tournament. Like, let's get real here.
Totally. Skyline Sports, MT.com, top 10 all summer long as part of our top 10, our 10-year anniversary. Appreciate you for tuning in. Thanks to UpTop Clothing. Visit teamuptop.com. Use Skyline15 at checkout for 15% off your order. Also, thanks to Cash One Pawn, the premier pawn shop in Western Montana. Visit cash1pawn.com. That's cash, the number 1, pawn.com. Make it a part of your shopping habits, whether you're in the market for firearms, jewelry, power tools, or everything in between. Cash1pawn.com. Also got to say thanks to Town Pump, as always, for keeping us fueled up and getting us all around the Big Sky Conference. Skyline Sports every day, every season. For Andrew Houghton, Brooks Nuanez, I'm Colter Nuanez. We'll be back next week with another Top 10 Countdown. In the meantime, have yourself a wonderful week and be good. We'll see you then.
Pump It Up Rewards Plus program and never pay full price for fuel again.
Save 5 cents on every gallon every day at any town pump across Montana.
Plus, earn and redeem points on your favorite in-store items to get free stuff with our clubs.
Stop in and pick up a rewards card. Download the Pump It Up Rewards Plus app today.
Or visit townpump.com/rewards to register and start saving.